Hey guys, welcome back to another video. Today we will be talking about something that has really been shocking when the numbers come out, and that is voter registration when it comes to, which party and everything new voters are registering as. Now, and not only that, just a surge in voter registration in general, regardless of party, compared to that in 2020. Just a surge of new voters, really, especially when you look at the demographics that are registering to vote in such higher numbers than 2020. It's definitely an area of concern for the Donald Trump campaign and exactly what Kamala Harris and her campaign likes to see. So CBS News came out with this report a couple days ago, and I don't think it's getting nearly enough of attention it's because of this, really. These are, and we'll get to this in a second, the actual results, so don't think we're not, but these are actual numbers that we know for sure. These are official state numbers. States' Board of Elections come out with these, the Secretaries of State office, and they come out with these numbers. They say who is registering to vote, not their names, obviously, but what they give the numbers. They give the demographics. They give the numbers when it comes to party, an increase from the previous time period. Whatever, so these are official numbers. These are not polls. We can, our predictions and our forecasts are only as accurate as the data that is provided. And that doesn't just mean you look at polling and base your forecast off polling, but that data that we make with our election predictions and everything, it includes polling, but that also includes how wrong polls have been in the past. It involves voter enthusiasm. It involves the electoral map, everything. It involves so much. But it also involves party registration numbers, which is critically important because unlike polls, these are actual numbers that we have set in stone for sure. Polls are a capture of a moment. I mean, for example, in Wisconsin, Biden led by 8.4% on election day on average in the polling. He only won the state by 0.6. They're only a period of time when party registration is, numbers that we actually know that are accurate. They're coming from the state. So let's take a look at what CBS reported when it comes to party registration. Now, these numbers, this is the increase that we are seeing from each of these demographics listed between the week of July 21st, 2020, compared to the week of July 21st, 2024, 4 years apart. So we see, starting with the least impressive, but is still extremely impressive, but the least impressive of the 5 demographics that are listed, young women. Incredibly important across the entire nation. Joe Biden's a key part of Joe Biden's coalition in 2020 was younger voters. Young women. Kamala Harris absolutely needs to turn them out. But what do you see? You see that compared to the week of July 21st in 2020, young women are registering to vote 83% more, so almost double that of 2020. Black Americans, an incredibly important voter bloc. Democrats need to turn them out in elections, especially in Georgia and North Carolina, where they are most prominent, where polling indicates that Trump and Harris are virtually tied in these two incredibly important states. So, where was I? There it is. So Black Americans up 86% with with voter registration. This is not by party. This is just voter registration in general. But as you'll see, these demographics, of course, break heavily towards the Democrats. And then we have Black women. So Black Americans and young women, but this is just Black women in general. They are up 98%, basically double that of 2020. And then we have the two most shocking numbers. Young Latinas, voter registration up 150%, more than double that of 2020. That is just insane. Of course, so important, especially in Arizona and Nevada, but even, people don't talk about this, but even in North Carolina and Georgia, and actually Texas and Florida look increasingly competitive, probably because of, voter demographic like young Latinos, just breaking heavily towards the Democrats. Party registration up 150%. And then the most stunning of all, young Black women. Of course, this is with Kamala Harris now, a Black woman herself at the top of the ticket. not really that surprising, to be completely honest. Kamala Harris being a history-making leader of a presidential ticket, being that presidential nominee, being a black woman herself, and, younger voters getting more engaged in the political system in the previous years, from the data we're seeing, their voter registration is up 175%. That is almost triple the registration that we saw among them in 2020. So these numbers are just insane. I mean, we've got young black women, young Latinas, black women in general, black Americans, even more generally than that, young women, all at least near doubling the voter registration among these groups from 2020, compared to now. So these voter blocks are so important. I mean, Joe Biden was able to build this coalition that involved every single one of these demographics. With black voters, he was able to carry the state of Georgia. He fell flat in North Carolina. He came close, but he didn't win North Carolina. And, it's looking like Kamala Harris is making gains with these groups. If she can get, or she could build, I should say, on the African-American turnout, get new voters in the, growing population state of North Carolina. New voters are moving to North Carolina. Then North Carolina could be in her column, but Biden won Georgia, of obviously key part of his coalition. Black voters were heavily on his side. It looks like Harris is running up the numbers with black Americans, increasing that of Joe Biden's performance in 2020. And then you have women, young women, they say in particular, but obviously, women, suburban women, huge influence in obviously the suburbs, particularly, or I should say, for example, not really particularly, but for example, in the suburbs of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. We see what we saw from 2016 to 2020 was something really interesting, and that was that the area of the state that shifted most heavily towards the left, towards the Democrats, in the 2020 election was the suburbs. We see that, for example, Chester County went to Hillary Clinton by 9.5%. 4 years later, it voted for Joe Biden by 17.1%. That's a 7.6% trend towards the Democrats. That's a similar situation in Delaware County, Montgomery County, and Bucks County. Now, let's compare that 7.6%, let's just compare that to the state as a whole. We see in 2016, it was 48 to 49. In 2020, it was 50 to 49. So it trended about 3 points statewide towards the Democrats, while, for example, the suburban Chester County, Pennsylvania, trended 7.6 points to the left. So the point is, Democrats are really, in at least 2020, they were really able to lock down the suburbs. And, of course, suburban women, once a very swingy voter bloc, of course, there are those notorious, or I should say, famous wine moms in the suburbs of Philadelphia in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, who voted maybe for Obama in 2008, but for sure Romney in 2012. And then, since then, they have been trending more and more heavily towards the Democrats. So, I mean, you could just see it here. This was, something that was talked about so much. In 2012, Chester County, Pennsylvania voted for Mitt Romney by 0.2%. And while the nation as a whole trended heavily towards the Republicans, Pennsylvania itself trended heavily towards the Republicans. Chester County went to Hillary Clinton by a tremendous 9.5% 4 years later. Suburbs hate Donald Trump. At least in Pennsylvania, the suburbs hate Donald Trump. I mean, just for example, Erie County, Pennsylvania voted for Obama by 16 points in 2012. 4 years later, they voted for Trump by 1.6. 16 for Obama, 1.6 for Trump. 17 or 18 point trend to the right. While Chester County, Pennsylvania trended towards the left, and it didn't just trend towards the left a marginal amount. It trended to the left by almost 10 points. The suburbs of America increasingly hate Donald Trump, and Kamala Harris, with these, numbers that we're seeing, with party registration among young women, it just confirms that she has these suburbs locked down. And these suburbs, especially in Pennsylvania, a critically important state, those suburbs could very well win her the election. You've got Pennsylvania. You've got Georgia. The suburbs of Atlanta are so important. You've got Arizona, the famous suburbs of Maricopa County, and that's already 272 electoral votes. That's not even with Michigan, which she is definitely going to win. So she can win with the suburbs. She really can't. So we've been talking a lot, and I still think this is true, that she will lose ground compared to 2020 in rural white America, particularly among the white men. Right? That is where I think that she loses ground. I believe, Biden is much more moderate, at least in 2020. He was much more moderate than her. He came across as more appealing to these, even if he didn't do very well among them compared to how Democrats did 10 or 20 years ago, he still had, respectable margins among these more moderate white men, maybe conservative leaning. Now, Kamala Harris, being an African-American woman, being more progressive than Joe Biden, I think that she has lost all ground among rural white men, so she loses ground among those voters, but it is clear she is gaining ground among other demographics that don't, that haven't traditionally voted in such high amounts. Now, I do want to bring this up real quick before we end this video, and that is, nothing predicted the result of the 2022 midterm elections like voter registration. The midterms, if you remember, in 2022, it was supposed to be a huge red wave. Joe Biden was deeply unpopular. Inflation was soaring. However, this was after the Dobbs decision. Abortion had been, left to the states, of course, by that Roe versus Wade overruling. And the polling failed to capture the surge of Democratic turnout, the new surge of Democratic turnout, because they said, the pollsters figured even with new party, wow, can I stop saying that, please? With new voter registration, most polls figured these people would not vote. Typically people don't cast their first vote ever in midterm elections. They're more engaged in presidential elections and turn out for those more. But they got this dead wrong because of the Dobbs decision. So, the only thing that predicted the outcome of the 2022 midterm elections and what we failed to look at was voter registration, because again, these are the actual numbers. They're not polls where they can be inaccurate. These are the actual numbers, and Democrats, as you can see, the midterms, what fueled the Democratic victory was young voters, as you can see here. Young voters, that's what the exit poll said. Exit polls actually are accurate. But young voters drove the Democratic resistance. They registered for the first time ever. They registered for the Democratic Party. And that is what pollsters cannot capture. So, I think that, based off these numbers, we're going to see a very similar situation in 2024, regardless of what the polls say. And the polls are already favorable towards Kamala Harris. So, thank you all for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to subscribe down below. We're trying to get to 10,000 subscribers before Election Day. But again, thank you all for watching this video, and I will see you all next time.